Hello, hello, this is Lyndall Duskant. Welcome to Music as a Metaphor. Today is August 27th, and I'm pre-recording this show. And we're going to be just jumping into some topics today pretty quick here, so I'm going to keep this intro short. But today what you can expect is to get a little bit more into Redemption Man, an original song that I wrote all about the idea of admitting when you're wrong and then doing the work, the feel to heal work, which is going ahead and being honest with yourself, getting out of delusion and being honest with yourself about where you're at as a way to heal. And it's an amazing, powerful thing that happens. I've experienced it over and over again, though the mechanisms are difficult to explain. And so I'm going to bring in Alan Watts today, a philosopher you've probably heard of. I actually hadn't really heard of him until more recently, and I've been reading a book of his called The Wisdom of Insecurity, and he explains this concept from a very interesting place. So we'll have a bit of a discussion about that, since so much of what I advocate with music is about, using music to heal and become holistic and to drop the programming, drop the limitations, drop the fears, and become this empowered version of yourself, which is who you truly are. But so many of us are talked out of that when we're even too young to talk, ironically. So yeah, that'll be a large part of the discussion today. But before we do that, I want to circle back and talk about a topic. The last two episodes, I've been really diving into the idea of owning your authority. And it's something that really needs to be faced, because I think so many people's low sense of self-esteem and sense of self-worth keeps them from doing activities that they'd really love to do. Many of them would like to pick up an instrument and don't have the gumption to do it. So we're going to circle back to that topic a little bit, as I just am posting the second episode of that today, and I want to talk a little bit about that, as well as freeworld.fm, where I have been posting every week. So once again, this is Music as a Metaphor. My name is Lyndall Duskant, and I hope that you experience that wonderful feeling, that joyful feeling that just makes you feel like you can't help but sing. So first of all, I want to start with an apology. Even though I'm reading a book about owning your authority means not apologizing, I'm still working on walking that fine line, because I also think there's an epidemic going on in the world of people not wanting to admit when they're wrong, preferring to live in delusion over just admitting a mistake. So I'm going to start with a mistake that happened last week. And that is that I did have an episode all queued up for freeworld.fm to play. But I had decided to try a fast, and this fast was a particularly difficult fast. I'm in a season of doing a lot of different types of fasting, and this one was particularly difficult. And so right when I had it all queued up and ready to go, I just couldn't. I just had to let go completely of everything and everyone. It was one of those very, very profound moments in the middle of a fast that I just completely surrendered to the present moment and just dropped everything. All the to-dos, all the list, this is my sense of purpose, every single last thing I needed to drop completely and just get completely present and get completely obedient. And it was very profound. I won't share too much about it. It was a very personal experience, but that's what kept me from posting. And the very next day, I listened and I was like, oh, this, could have posted this. So last week, I was just a little bit late with posting, both on my YouTube as well as to freeworld.fm, which I want to circle back, because I did speak about Free World a little bit. I'm actually on episode 24 now of creating these episodes for freeworld.fm, but I haven't really talked much about it. This is an independent internet radio station started by some incredibly cool cats that I'm happy to call friends. And that is Billy Ray Valentine of The Infinite Fringe, which is a podcast maybe you've heard of, as well as Wise Wolf, who is an incredible he's also a podcaster and a paratruther, I think is what he's called on Instagram, and also a seller of precious metals. And both of these gentlemen are out doing some amazing things in the world. And I, in particular, have gravitated to them because they are walking a line of being in the alternative truth space or the truther space, but also recognizing and not being afraid to call out deception within this movement, and very much to the sacrifice of popularity or being able to gain the algorithms or getting into conflicts. They've been walking a line of integrity for some time, and when they talked about starting this radio station, I really hadn't thought about doing my own show. But I thought this was a great opportunity to do it. And I started out live. I started out broadcasting live, but if anybody's ever tried to work with internet radio stations, they're technology that's coming online, but there's some glitches. And in particular, when I won't get into particulars, I was having some trouble using or going live unless I had this absolute perfect setup that I can't use when I'm traveling. So as I started traveling this summer, I started just pre-recording episodes. Now, side note, I always had intended to, in creating this content once a week for freeworld.fm, sort of start to dip my toes into this world of trying to share what I have to share verbally, right? I've been much more comfortable just expressing myself through music and art and videos, because so often what I would like to express really can't be contained in words, and I've found speaking to be one of the most rudimentary forms of communication. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into Alan Watts. Many different people understand what I'm saying, so I don't always have to explain that completely. But I have really enjoyed teaching. Okay, most of my teaching has been done in one-to-one scenarios or group scenarios in person. Up until COVID, it was mostly in person, and then it's gone online a little bit more. But this was my attempt, this was my effort to start to speak more through the internet, to try to teach through the internet. Many of the things that I had learned, many of the things that I discuss on one-to-one basis with students, that seemed like maybe more people would like to hear it. And because I did hit, even before COVID, a scaling issue where I had too many people wanting to learn from me, and I didn't have the time and the availability to do that. So there was always this idea of scaling and how to encapsulate many of the things that I've learned over the years as a teacher, also many of the deeper insights that I have about music as a metaphor being one of the best ways to explain it, because I've always come to music from a deeper place. For better or for worse, I've always been a deep thinker. As I get a lot of comments, I'm just thinking. To me, these are just thoughts. But oftentimes the response I get from people is, wow, that's really deep, or I hadn't thought of that. So I also was looking for a space to start to capture some of these deeper thoughts, as I know I'm not the only one who's a deep thinker, and I know it's not everybody, and not everybody needs to be, but in an effort to start to share my unique gifts that I might have with the world, that's what this radio show has been about. That being said, I did, in the middle of that fast, get some news that freeworld.fm is having a little bit of a rough start. We really hadn't had a full launch. There's some great names that have been participating, but we've continued to have some technical issues, and so we never quite went for the full launch. It's always been a soft launch. And so there is some question about what's going to happen with freeworld.fm going forward. And for the time being, I'm going to continue to release a show there every week, even though it's not necessarily live, because it's been a great rhythm for me. And I'm also going to continue to repost the episodes on my YouTube channel, both as a full episode and then trying to clip them up and make shorter clips of them on the various subjects. That has been a big endeavor, something that I've complained about in past episodes as being a bit of tedious work. But it's also been helpful because guess what it's doing? It's making me comb through my content. Now, I'm about 10 episodes behind where I am on Free World with what I'm posting on YouTube, and that is because back in some episodes I explained how I went through a period where I just really started feeling very vulnerable. Like it was everything I could do to show up and post on Free World, but I was also experiencing technical issues. I didn't know where they were coming from. Full episodes just wouldn't air, and all of it made me hesitate. And as I've explained before, I am somebody who, feels very vulnerable sharing my voice. First, it took me a very long time. I was a later adult before I was even willing to admit that I wanted to do music and that I wanted to share my voice through music, that I was finally able to start to sing in front of other people. And then it took many, many more years of being out on the scene, performing, to actually be able to listen to myself and really start to share the recordings. I could sort of show up and do the gigs, but I couldn't think about it too much afterwards. A lot of criticism, a lot of perfectionism, a lot of blocks that were coming up. And then now that I'm taking another step, because I've gotten much more comfortable with sharing my voice through song, I'm now just trying to share on a bigger audience my deeper thoughts and my intimate teachings that I have. And in doing that, I hit a wall. I hit I'm too vulnerable. I'm not really sure. Oftentimes after I record an episode, I'm like, what was that? Does that even make sense? Am I saying too much? I talk a lot about discernment. So because of that, I took a little bit of a break in posting on YouTube, because it's a bigger audience than I have here on Free World. And in doing that, I picked them back up and have been surprisingly interested in my own content, so that's good. And that's why there's about a 10 episode delay. So the future of this is a little bit unknown for the moment. I don't know if there's going to be a point in time that I will choose not to post on Free World. I don't know if there's a point where I won't be able to post on Free World. And also, will I get caught up with the content on my YouTube and then decide to go a different direction completely? Because there are some other creative projects that I have not had the time for, and so there is a question of needing to make space in that. But one thing that's been a delight is showing up here every week and talking through some of these subjects, and it's helping me to comb through. It's helping me to think through some of these things, and I believe it's all leading to figuring out a way to share this content in a very digestible, easy way, whatever that it looks like in the future. So it's just having me spend time with my content, and think through the best way to share that content. So that's where I'm at. It's a process. It's always a process. And with all of my content, I like showing behind the scenes because I just think it inspires other people to pick up their mantle, and that it busts through that perfectionist idea of maybe in 2 or 3 years I've got this content absolutely beautiful. That was supposed to be a kiss. This beautiful content, well done in digestible forms. I don't mean to be inconsiderate about sharing. I know that many of us don't have time, and I love the professionalism of some of the content creators I listen to who really have gotten their process down. I'm still working on mine, and I appreciate those that are with me now. These are some of the more raw, improvised, and maybe it's the way it will always be, because I've always been an improvisateur, as they say in French. I've always loved improvising. The drawback to being too produced is that you lose the inspiration, you lose the spirit. Whereas very much when it's raw and not as produced, which is a lot of the live music that I love, a lot of the bands that I love, a lot of the music I came from, it was so much less produced, but there was so much more spirit to it. So it is trying, and that's where I'm at. I'm in the process of finding that balance for me. So I wanted to explain all that's going on, because it might be that I stop advertising for freeworld.fm, and maybe if there's people out there, you could offer some prayers and maybe even some help if you have it for freeworld.fm. I believe it's a wonderful platform that really could be a great place for people who are in the alternative space. They've been in it for a while, and they truly don't want to be bombarded with psyops from any place anymore. And they're able to see through the psyops. And there's a variety of different personalities on freeworld.fm. So there's archives there now. You don't have to listen to it live. You can go there and sort of check it out at freeworld.fm. And I will keep you posted. But if there is a time when I'm not posting on freeworld.fm, then you can always go to my YouTube channel, which is lindelduscant@com, because I will littleduscant.com. They will certainly continue to share this content there. So also backing up, so that was just to apologize because last week there was a rerun, and then this week I just posted. So today there will be one, but by the time you're hearing this will be a week later. And so hopefully I'll be back on schedule and won't be missing anything. And I will certainly give some notice if I decide to sort of call this a season, like season 1, and say this is the last episode on Free World, and then use that maybe the rest of the year. That's tentatively what I'm thinking, to get caught up on my YouTube as well as these other creative projects that I have, which I'm not even ready to talk about yet. They're all floating in my mind. Let's just put it that way. And I can't wait to bring them into reality, but they need time and space to do that. So also interesting happened is that, like, the last 2 episodes, what happened was I had been away. I'd pre-recorded a bunch of stuff. And then I sat down to record this idea of authority, which is very, very important. And I found it very difficult to talk about. So I ended that first episode, it was 2 weeks ago, on a cliffhanger. And it was this idea that a friend had brought up, like, is it truly possible to have gifts from God given to you when you're born or before you're born, and to just not use them, right? To just be so off your path that you don't even know. And I'm going to say absolutely, because that's what happened to me until I was in my early 20s. There was some gifts, I think, that were naturally coming online for me, and one of them being compassion. Some of them being more of the psychic gifts. There was all of that was there, but it was very underdeveloped, and there was no place for it. There was no radar for it. The people around me, they didn't mean to, but it was almost like being gaslit, because that was just not part of, quote unquote, the real world, a lot of the things I was experiencing. So I'm lucky that I didn't drop it altogether, which is, I think, what happens to a lot of people. You just put it aside to fit in and be accepted and be in the world, right? And these things get so far pushed from you that they're unrecoverable. But in my case, that wasn't. I kept it sort of as a on the back burner, like a secret, personality or secret exploration. And I first started through self-help books and more new age type stuff, trying to explore some of these things. And then there was this desire in me to uncover the mystery of life, albeit I had a lot of arrogance about actually being able to discover it. And that was in part because nobody else seemed interested. Nobody was asking these questions. So I thought, all you got to do is ask them. Maybe in a couple years you can figure it out. And as I hit my early 20s, what ended up happening through a fortunate experience is recognizing that I actually really loved music. It's amazing to think that I could have been in my early 20s and just didn't even know it. It just wasn't in my thoughts. It just wasn't in my radar. But it turned out I did love music, and I felt music very deeply. And that's really the gift that I have in life, is the ability to absolutely feel music on this level that I've noticed not everybody feels. Now, if we lived in a different world and this was nurtured as children and we weren't turned off to our creativity and traumatized, etc., would we all have this connection? Is it something that is born through our spirit and through our soul? I believe so, but that's just my guess. But in reality, I was very lucky that I didn't lose that sensibility, that sense. And so doing something with music was it became very obvious to me in my early 20s, but up until that point, it was a complete surprise. So that's why I think it's very possible to have gifts that are not online, and that you only discover them through this process of healing and peeling back your own layers of being desensitized, being traumatized, maybe even being in sin, maybe even being a jerk, maybe even being a narcissist. All these things I do believe can be healed. But I will say that the caveat that, when you're online and a lot of people say, well, narcissists can never be healed, or borderline personalities can never be healed, or they're rarely healed. To me, the secret ingredient is Christ. He can heal anything. So a lot of these are more secular type of, counselors or psychologists. So to them, they rarely see it. And I would think that is true. But I think through a relationship with Christ, you can heal anything. And he's also the one that will take you through this process. So that was the question that I cliffhangered on was like, let's say that you do wake up in your 20s like I did, and then you have to sort of right your ship, right? You have to sort of realize like, hey, I'm really off and I want to be on. And in my case, I was like, I'm a terrible person. I'm bananas, I'm in delusion. I'm in all these things. How do I right my ship? How do I come back around? And this is Redemption Man, the song that I wrote. This is what it's about, because so many people would rather never have that realization. And I will say, I think the older you get, the harder it is, because think of the pain of being a 70-something-year-old and waking up and realizing, holy cow, I was wrong about this my whole life. Right when I thought I was out doing this and that and serving the world and being so righteous about something, so arrogant about something, I was so completely off and wrong. It's very painful. Okay, so my song Redemption Man, that we'll talk a little bit about today, and that I played on the end of the last episode, that's what that's about. Just admit you're wrong and then begin this process. And with Jesus at your side, this can be a very gentle process, but it can also be, require a lot of patience and humility, because it's hard to recognize that as you're riding the ship, you might only be like 5% now, like 5% capable of being more in tune with who you are and your natural gifts, which may be particular things such as music or art, or maybe speaking about the Bible. I know quite a few people who have incredible gifts in theology, whatever your gift is, even recognizing what this is and then spending the years to actually develop it. Because in my case, I had given up piano lessons when I was young, and I really wasn't that focused on it. And now I was trying to make up for years and years. So all of that can require a great deal of patience. And in that, maybe it takes everything. The metaphor I use is it takes everything to start to turn your ship around. And so in doing that, you still might be like 90% living in the world and living in sin, and who knows what you're doing, right? And then as you're slowly waking up, that percentage, it's like now it's down to 80% service to others. I mean, 80%, let's say it's like 90% you're selfish and you're in the world, and 10% you're starting to try to turn that ship around and start to, figure out a way to give your gifts to the world and be more selfless and be more patient. Like, you're working on it, but you're falling so short, right? All the time. And then this process might take decades, right? So slowly, maybe you finally get to 50%. 50% of your time is being spent in a way that you feel aligned with your soul, and you feel like it's good for other people and it's service to other people. And then, but still 50% is like, selfish. Coming home, you're playing video games, you're eating junk food, you're fighting with people, who knows what it is, right? Whatever those sins are, maybe like you're even out, taking advantage of other people in certain ways. I don't know. Whatever that 50% is, the idea is, would God come in at that point and judge you and just be like, take you out, right? It's only the people at 100% service to him, which I believe there are some people in this world that are at that place, though I don't think they're the people you're going to hear about or they're going to be celebrated. In many cases, these are the persecuted people. And so you might actually have a terrible view of them, and you don't know in their heart that they're actually 100% devoted. Are those the only people that are going to get sort of spared? Are those the only people that are going to be loved by God? If you're at 20%, what's his attitude towards you? That was sort of my cliffhanger question. It's taken me a while to get around to it. And right after, and so I didn't want to end that cliffhanger. I did a whole nother episode, but I was never really able to answer that question, because, to be full disclosure, I've been listening to a lot of like judgment stuff on America, and honestly, we are such a fallen nation, and this is such a fallen world, and I can really get into that mindset of just hating things, hating how people act, hating what's, goes for normal society these days. And it's awful, like the days of Noah, and kind of wanting to like be honest with people and be like, hey, that ain't great. Why are you doing that? Standing up and being, maybe more of a voice of God, of like saying, repent, this is not okay what we're doing. And in particular, when you hear about the things happening to children in this world and the human trafficking, and we're just turning a blind eye, and we're just sort of doing our own little thing? Is God really okay with that? Like, I struggle with that sometimes. Like, should I be doing way more than I'm doing? And I'm sure the answer is yes, but it also is a process. It also, what I realized is later that day when I got done recording that second episode and I still really didn't have the answer came very quickly to me in scripture. And it was scripture I had meant to read earlier that morning, which I would have had the answer to. But it's a scripture that actually I had debated before I even read the Bible. I'd always heard of this, and I'd always used this to promote the idea of like God loves every single one of us. And at some point in time, every single one of us will be able to return to God. And this is when I brought that up to somebody who is a theologian and an incredible mastermind of apologetics. He was like, really? Did it really say that in the Bible? And he was the one who really got me to read the Bible, because there were so many times I would like paraphrase the Bible and he'd be like, really? Does it really say that? I realize now that that was all in an effort to get me to actually read the Bible myself, because I really hadn't, except for random books like Revelation. I read Revelation on 9/11 as I was convinced it was over then. And then I had read Corinthians, but I really hadn't read the Bible. And I was, like many people, think I know exactly what was in the Bible without ever reading it. And I realize now that that's one of those things that people will say is like, all you have to do is get somebody to read the Bible and it will change their life and it will change their view about what's in the Bible. And I have to say for my own self, that was absolutely true. So I sat down to read it because I recognized I'd read all these other, I think I've said this before, all these other spiritual texts out there, but I had never read the Bible. It didn't make sense for my own particular life. Maybe if you're not reading other spiritual things, it doesn't seem as blatantly weird. But for me to recognize that I'd made it up into my 40s reading all these other dense spiritual texts and never bothered to read the Bible really, it seemed like a gaping hole in my knowledge. So I did. And truthfully, I read it from beginning to end, which is not really the most advisable way, but that was how little I knew about the Bible. I didn't know it wasn't chronological per se. And I sat down. It took me about 2.5 years of every single morning reading it, and it was riveting. It absolutely did change everything about my worldview. And for me, even out of all the spiritual texts, and I don't discount some of the wisdom that I've gotten from spiritual texts, not at all, but I never got the grounding and the wisdom, not that I'm wise, but I'm saying a vision into wisdom, which really is about practical knowledge. It really is being able to be in your body and making the right decision at the right time. A very grounded view of being in this world. I think all the spiritual texts I had before sort of still had me up in the air a little bit, and a little bit up in a fantasy place, and a little bit up in a bliss in any place of like God is love. And the Bible brought me back down in a way that I always wanted to be, with my feet on the ground, in a way to say God is love and he is truth. And so here's the truth of what the Bible actually says in this parable about the lost sheep. It's Luke 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus said this parable, "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulder and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." So that was the scripture that came to me later that day, and in a way that sometimes, we can get an answer that speaks to us, but maybe it's hard to convey the truth we feel in it, how it speaks to our hearts, I guess would maybe be a good way to say it. It spoke to my heart, and it said that yes, God is rejoicing over us, when he is pursuing us. Even when we're out and we're only able to make a 2% change towards him, a 5% commitment towards him, whatever that is, I firmly believe that his love is so profound and so much bigger and so much more compassionate for us, so personal for us, that we really don't understand that yes, he very much is pleased with us when we're able to make any sort of turn towards him, whatever that is. So I wanted to share that today because I just think it was a cliffhanger I left on, but it's part of the reason of claiming your authority. It's part of understanding that this is the love that is there for you. This is the heritage that is there for you, that God wants you to come back to him, that he calls to you to come back to, and all you have to do is start to answer that call, and then have the patience and the humility to recognize that it might not be that you change overnight and become like Jesus, but that the call is to start to walk a path towards that you have to combine your will with him. Even if this is something the Course in Miracles says, it's even if you're only like 1% willing. There's times in our lives when we don't want to do something, but we're sure, the discernment is there that we're being called to do it, including forgiving people. And so that was an idea from the Course in Miracles I always liked, is you just have to be 1% willing, and then God will match you on the rest. And it doesn't mean that sometimes it is miraculous, honestly. Sometimes miraculously your heart can be changed, but it's not always that, because time is nothing to Jesus and to God. They live in a realm different from us. The spirit realm is quite different. Time is one of the first things that falls apart there. So it might take you decades, it might take a lifetime, but don't give up. Keep your eye on the prize. Stay focused there and recognize that there is an inheritance for you, and in that inheritance you are loved by a Father that has so much to give you. It's just that you have to go through the sanctification process of letting go of what your idea of that love looks like, because he's bigger than you. He's outside of this world, and we have all been ingrained in a fallen world, one that many people believe is an absolute illusion. I don't know. I stand on the fence sometimes about it. If this world is completely an illusion made by the devil, and that we're all into it, or if it's more of our mindset and our perception of this world, and as we get sanctified, we can see more and more of God's true creation, and it is a physical creation. It is connected to the spirit. And it's sort of that ability to live in your body, embodied, but truthfully so aligned with spirit, 100% with spirit, so that miracles happen constantly, that you feel love all the time, that you don't have to go through the suffering. Most of us are somewhere in that sanctification process. Maybe not even most. Maybe I have no idea what the numbers are. How many people out there haven't even started the process? How many people out there have completely denied God altogether, denied spirit altogether? Where does that put them? And that's where, this passage that I just read, I always thought that meant like every single person, it doesn't matter how lost, will eventually be found because they're being pursued, right? That this world will not collapse. The illusion will not collapse until every single person is saved. But I've since had to give up on that, not because I don't know if it's true. That's more what I'm saying. I've been able to, when I've read that passage, I have also been able to read it, or I guess the argument for that would be that there might be people in this world that don't have a soul, that are NPCs, that have been created by fallen angels. They're not God's creations, and God isn't pursuing them. And are some of those people, leaders of this world? Are some of those people our family? Are some of those people the NPCs, the non-principal characters walking by? I've also heard it as the idea of those people are NPCs until the day that they decide to turn to God, even if it's like a 0.01%, they start to use their will to say, hey, God, okay, I do need help, or I do want you in my life in one way or another. The minute they do that, then their soul starts to reconnect with your body. But before that, it isn't a given, because I guess what makes it tricky is free will. Is free will an illusion, or does that person truly have the choice to not return to God, to not return to his creation? I believe those people are doomed. If that's the case, I believe that this is the misery we feel, the suffering we feel, because as I mentioned in a previous episode, that separation from God is what feels so horrible, because it's not, our birthright. It's kind of like the prodigal son. It's not. We might have thought that's what we want. Some would say we made a mistake. Some would say that we were deceived. I don't know, because in God's dominion, other people would argue that nothing can happen outside of God. God is everything. God is love. So how could somebody, how could the serpent even have been created? Where did he come from? How could the angels even have fallen outside of God's dominion? But I guess that's really comes down to free will, and we're starting to get into a place that I'm not ready to go today, if ever. So that's the mystery. That is the mystery that we are dealing with, is that none of us truly have all the answers here, even if we've read the Bible like 48,000 times. That doesn't mean that you have all the answers, because as I've heard it said recently, God is bigger than the Bible. Yes, God can absolutely speak through the Bible, and I personally will attest there's something very different about the Bible from any other spiritual text I've read, and I'm so thankful it's in my life now. I think that there's a lot to be said for the spiritual warfare we're in, that the Bible is an integral part, as well as Ephesians' idea there's nothing new under the sun, and giving you a better lens on what we're dealing with, because it's so easy to get caught up in the zeitgeist. And I feel like the Bible is such a great way to ground you into an ageless or an outside of time type of thinking. But that doesn't mean that you understand God. It doesn't mean the minute that you start to think you understand God, you're kind of putting yourself on the same level as God. And in reality, you're limiting God. Okay, you're not limiting yourself, you're limiting God. Actually, you're limiting yourself too, because then when you align with God and you open yourself up to the idea that there is a mystery here, and you don't try to contain it all within your logic, now you're actually aligned with the power of God, with his love, with his miracles, and you become a formidable vessel on this earth to reclaim the kingdom for God. And that is what I believe is not all of Jesus, but that is the part of Jesus that we are being called to emulate, to live like him. And it takes a submission. It takes a surrendering to an unknowing. It takes letting go of your arrogance that you know it all, or that you will know it all, right? And this is where Redemption Man is about. It's about being humble enough to recognize that you're wrong, and humble enough to recognize that many of us are indoctrinated when we're young by our families and by our school systems to think, that we understand everything when we don't. And even to humble ourselves to the idea of there maybe was a mistake that happened in the beginning, that God's creation isn't supposed to be going this way, and that so many people blame things on God, but in reality it's not God, it's us choosing to create without God. By us, I mean collective humanity, and to side with forces that don't have our best interest, that are sabotaging to humans. And this deception is something that cannot be seen unless you have wisdom, unless you recognize that though God is beyond evil, maybe that evil is something that you have to deal with while you're in the body and you're in this world. And so Redemption Man is a song that I wrote for somebody who's aging, reaching the end of their life, and I've seen a lot of this, just doubling down, just doubling down on some of the sins, some of the suffering, just unwilling to admit and course correct. And in this song, I use the word feel to heal. Feel to heal is a term that I've liked to use a lot. Feel to heal is something that I've personally experienced for this inner work, because a lot of the inner work has to do with forgiving others, forgiving yourself, coming into alignment. And this is absolutely necessary to own your authority, because if you don't, you will still be run by your traumas and your programming. All that has been designed on purpose, and you will go unconscious, and you'll, start to just do things that you are very embarrassed that you do later as you realize, like for example, somebody triggers you and you fight back and you argue and you yell and you lose your temper. That's an example of having some trauma in you that you probably need to heal, because being a master of your emotions and a master of who you are means that you don't fall into those traps. So feeling to heal is about this inner work where, let's say you do that. Let's say that you do. Rather than just drinking or smoking pot or being a workaholic or just pretending like something didn't happen, or maybe the most widely used is to blame it all on the other person and take zero responsibility for the situation. Like, they made me lose my temper. You sit with it. You sit with the misery of what it feels like to be that type of human, a human being who, can be cruel, a human being who can lose their temper, a human being who is not in control of themselves, is not a master of who they are. What are those feelings that come up with that? You have to first feel the anger. Maybe you're angry at this person, and as you sit with that feeling, now it turns into guilt, and then as you sit with that guilt, it's a profound sense of unworthiness and shame. You gotta feel that stuff, because for most of us, it's in there. It's buried very, very deep because it's so painful to feel. And so feeling to heal is sitting with it, because what's amazing about it is that when you do this work and you do just sit with it, and by sitting with it, it doesn't mean literally just sitting with it, although sometimes it's so miserable, like all you can do is just cry into a pillow, right? Or one of my favorite things to do is take a warm shower, or you go for a long walk, or you go out and you sit in nature, or if you can, and this does take another level of mastery, sometimes you do an piece of artwork about it, or you write a song about it, or you play some music about it, or you improvise, or you dance, you listen to some music and you dance. These things can be, you can start to invoke your creative and your imagination in this process. And it's interesting because it can just make the whole thing, like I've said sometimes it's almost easier, like it's occupying that left brain a little bit by doing something, so that your right brain can then really allow these emotions to come to the surface without being too overwhelmed. The biggest problem with this field to heal is being absolutely overwhelmed by the emotions that come in, it being so scary. And so sometimes you really do need a counselor, or you really do need a friend there with you just to feel these things. But the miraculous thing is that when you feel them and you don't run from them, they heal. Why is that? Well, there is a certain level that you have the neurology of it is that you have these traumas trapped. A trauma happened when you were too young and you couldn't feel it, and the intense pain, the intense shame, it could have killed you as a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old. Whatever it was so deep. 5-year-old, 7-year-old, you weren't an adult, you weren't able to feel it, so you buried it. And then that trauma, though, never went away, and like attracts like. So then it attracted more trauma, then it attracted more. And so then you start to have these patterns in life that repeat this trauma because it's calling your attention to heal it. When you actually pay attention to it, now it's almost like it can move somehow. It moves. It's experienced. The way I would say it is you bring the light of your own consciousness to it. And one of the things that I've done may or may not work for you. I would say it would, but I think it doesn't have to be. I don't know. But one of the things I've done is I brought Jesus and the Holy Spirit in those moments. And that's when the most powerful shifts have happened. Suddenly, it's gone. Suddenly you transcend it. Suddenly you have the flip side of it. Like, for example, a lot of times at the bottom of my well, when I go down some of these synapses, there's a profound sense of unworthiness. Well, when I get to that bottom of the well and I feel that unworthiness, then all of a sudden a shift happens, and it can almost feel euphoric at times. It's like an insight comes in, and it's that realization of, no, you're not unworthy because you are a child. This is just an example. You are a child of God. There's a divine inheritance, but you've got to let go of these false notions. The guilt, the shame, the fear, the anger. A lot of times when you really face them, you recognize they're nothing. Another metaphor I've used a lot, I believe I got from the Course in Miracles, is that the sun is always there. Your inheritance, you as a son of God, the sun is always shining on you. God is always calling to you, but these black clouds get in the way. And let's say you just refuse to look at the black clouds. You never want to see them for what you are. So you spend your life running from them with all these other behaviors and all these things you're doing. But when you turn and you just look at these clouds and you recognize them for what they are, you realize that the sun never stopped shining on you. Those clouds were merely mist. When you break down what a cloud is, it's nothing. It's nothing. And so by facing it, the light of your consciousness, you can reconnect with who you truly are. And this is owning your authority. So this is important work that many people never do. I came from a tradition of like, why do you feel your emotions? Emotions are nothing. And this is true. I mean, a lot of that work in the earlier days, and I want to spare people this, yes, your emotions, they're the clouds. You don't want to make them the masters of who you are. You don't want to over-identify with them. But when you do this work, you recognize that they aren't anything, and who you are becomes more and more that solid rock in the storm. A child of God, very, very loved. And in an interesting way, the more humble you are, the more you return to God. In a way, the more special you feel, because you also recognize that you are unique. You are important to God. He has things He wants for you. He has gifts He wants for you, but you have to be willing to get humble, and you have to be willing to face any blocks to that. And the blocks are painful. So that's what my Redemption Man song is about. And I'm going to have a video up by the time you read on my YouTube to see it. But when I was reading Alan Watts today, it was interesting because this book called The Wisdom of Insecurity, it's a lot about accepting. In that process, what you're doing is you're no longer running, you're no longer trying to separate from your pain, you're accepting it. And by accepting it, somehow it's this magic. And I always saw it as magic, but it's interesting the way that he writes about it. The wisdom and security is it's not magic, it's just what is. What he's basically saying is that modern society, and he wrote this in the 50s, so we've only gotten worse. We keep trying to separate ourselves, like the I looking at our experience. Like, who is this I looking at this pain? And we keep trying to separate ourselves from the fear or the pain that we're experiencing. But he's talking a lot about the idea of that's futile. It doesn't even make sense. And it's causing a lot of this strange behavior that we have, where it's like the head of the elephant doesn't know what the butt of the elephant is doing, and we're working against, there's a battle, an interior battle. And a lot of the ways that we're trying to improve society aren't helping society at all. We're actually just becoming more and more miserable. And it's because of this weird internal struggle we have, where we're separating ourselves from ourselves. So he's saying, no, it's all about being fully present in the moment of now, which is something that's talked about a lot, but it's much harder to do. But this is what this feel to heal is, in a way. In that moment, you're not running from your pain. You're not running from your anger. You're not running from whatever's happening that you're judging shouldn't be, and let me push it over there because I don't want to be that. No, you're accepting it. You're bringing it in, and you're unifying with it. And the interesting thing, let me read some of the ways that he writes about it. So he says, we suffer from the delusion that the entire universe is held in order by the categories of human thought, fearing that if we do not hold to them with the utmost tenacity, everything will vanish into chaos. So this is what he's saying, like, our thoughts about things are separating us from the experience of it. He's saying there's nothing wrong with science trying to understand the world, but when we replace reality with what science has said it is, now we're living in an illusion. We're living in a symbol, right? And this is one of those things that I try to do a lot on this show, and as well as in my art, my work, is try to explain that words are a symbol. They're not reality. That it's powerful when you can use these symbols, but to mistake reality itself for these symbols is silly. And this is what happens when people get entirely inside their own logic, and they think that we've got it all figured out through science. It's so arrogant, and it's so limiting. Another way that he says it, and this is something that I explain a lot about, jazz itself becoming too academic. And that's something I want to talk about. I probably won't be able to talk about on this show, but some of the recent jazz I've been hearing is this is a quote actually from Whitehead. I don't know who Whitehead is, but it's in this book. He says, we are too exclusively bookish in our scholastic routine. In the Garden of Eden, Adam saw the animals before he named them. In the traditional system, children name the animals before they saw them. So this is part of the criticisms of what happens to children, how they lose their creativity and they lose their footing in the world because they're sat down at these desks and they're just taught symbols. And that's it. 8 hours a day of reading symbols without being, guided through experiencing the world, experiencing themselves as the world, as part of the world, owning that experience. Let me see. I also have another one. Oh, here we go. The clash between science and religion has not shown that religion is false and science is true. It has shown that all systems are definitions. All systems of definition, which religion and science are relative to various purposes, and that none of them actually grasp reality. So scientists and people with the religious, spirit, they do the same thing, and they try to replace reality with what they're reading about, with what they're studying, not understanding that they are limiting themselves, closing themselves off to the experience of, I would say, God himself. Okay, this is the final quote that I want to do for this Alan Watts book, The Wisdom of Insecurity. It says, it surely is absurd to seek God in terms of a preconceived of what God is. To seek thus is only to find out what we already know, which is why it is so easy to deceive oneself in all manner of supernatural experiences and visions. To believe in God and to look for God, for the God you believe in, is simply to seek confirmation of an opinion. To ask for a revelation of God's will and then test it by reference to your preconceived moral standards is to make a mockery of asking. You knew the answer already. Seeking for God in this way is no more than asking for a stamp of absolute authority and certainty on what you believe in any case, for a guarantee that the unknown in the future will be a continuation of what you want to retain from the past, a bigger and better fortress for I. And then I don't know, he said something in German. So basically what he is saying is that so much of us, stay within a preconceived notion of reality and of God. We extend it, and by that we are limiting God, and we're claiming an improper authority. It's an authority based on what we know. It's not an authority based on who we are. And so he speaks a lot in this book about the process of just, the next time you feel fear, rather than like separating yourself saying, I feel fear, and you're labeling this fear, which is a big part of emotional intelligence that we do teach. He's saying just feel the fear. Don't separate yourself from it. And in that, there's nothing to know. You actually already know how to experience fear. You already know how to be this sort of bigger version of yourself that's not separated, that's not in conflict. It's natural to you. And this resonates with me because so much of what I've learned about feeling to heal or becoming who you are is about letting go of trying to be who you are. It's just being who you are. It's easier than we think. This overthinking, this over-trying, this perfectionism, all these things, they're the biggest blocks. And it's let me bring it to a very concrete version. When adults come to me with singing, so often for them, it is about having to unlearn all the things they're doing to try to be a good singer. Okay? It is about unwrapping all of that and just, it's like what happens with little children. They just sing. You don't have to teach a child how to sing. They know how to sing, right? They might get better and better over time. They might be a little bit limited in their ability to remember, a melody or to sing something twice the same way. But as far as just their voice, it's pure, it's open, it gives you chills, and they just sing. And so many adults have forgotten that. We've forgotten how to just be who we actually are. Now, did we forget on purpose? Some would say that, yeah, this world is designed to make us forget. Maybe it's our karma because at some point we did choose this sort of unnatural way of being, and overly intellectual, overly academic way of living, and it got us out in tune with who we really are as children of God. And maybe this is what Jesus is saying about being a child. Like, you have to submit to a place, because what it is about children, they don't act like they know everything, or maybe some of them do, but it won't let them, their pride won't get in the way of them doing something they want to do and being in the moment, of being fully present. And many of them are in tune with this love and this kindness. They're just who they are. They don't try to hide it. I believe that going back to who we are, to bring this full circle, to own your authority, is a lot about recognizing that God is a mystery to us, that we don't have it all figured out. And in many cases, we're going to be wrong a lot. Maybe 90% of the time we're wrong. But that if we will truly open our heart and ask for God to be in our lives, ask to return to our inheritance, that's enough. That God and his angels, Jesus will be there as an intercessor to help us return to that place. And it's a lot about unlearning. It's a lot about letting go. And that's what I did last week. There's these moments where you just got to let all of it go. You have to lose your life to gain it. And you just got to be willing to say, I might not have been right about any of this. I might have been working now, in some cases, for 30 years to right my ship. And I'm still a way off course. But that's okay, because my heart is present with God right now. And that's all I need. I don't need to know anything. I just need to recognize that, to believe. I need to have the faith to believe that God is real and that the inheritance is real, and to have that faith like a child that I am being cared for and I'm being led and I'm being guided. So that's what I've got to say for today. I didn't get a chance to talk about New York, something that I've been wanting to talk about for a few weeks, but I'm glad I waited, because I have gotten, the last month or so, I've gotten to hear so much great live jazz from one place to another. And I've also gotten to hear some really bad jazz, academic jazz. And so I have lots of thoughts on that. And it sort of leads from this idea of, like, we're trying too hard and somehow we've lost the spirit of it. And that many of the people that are on the local scene or the smaller bands is where I really heard it cooking. Okay, including a band I heard last week that was cooking. And so that's one of the things I'm going to talk about next week. We're going to talk about New York City in general, sort of seeing behind the curtain of Oz. And we're also going to talk about the state of the music as I've been hearing it lately, because I have gotten to hear a lot lately. And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about, why we need more people stepping up to be out playing music from a spirit place. Because I want to talk about the ways that some of this stuff that we talked about today really does apply to what's happened to music and art and culture, and why we need people who have been doing the interior work to let go of all of the programming and the things that are keeping them locked in a state of separation. The people that are sort of figuring out how to unify with their spirits, bring their souls back online. That's the music and the art and the writing and all kinds of creative things that we need out, because vibrationally other people can feel it and they start to catch on to it. And then, the more of us that are able to return to a purer vibration, a higher vibration, one that's not being bogged down by our fears and our insecurities, then it catches, it's contagious. And that's part of why it's so hard in this world to get out of those lower frequencies, because it's so widespread. But the more of us that do, we kind of make pinholes in this ceiling of frequency that seems to be trapping all of us. And the more of us that escape out of it, the more we can pull others up, even if it's one or two. And that's really what it's about. Because at the end of the day, when you realize how loved and cared for you are, you don't really need anything anymore. You're free of needing anything. You can just be present in your life and in your present moment. And then you can use your time to help pull up other people in whatever way, so that they can reconnect with their souls. You can help Jesus find all those lost sheep. And I know there's a lot out there. So that being said, I hope you really have a great week. And I don't know what's coming. I don't know if something bad's coming. A lot of people are trying to say that. But I know that you can have a rock in the storm no matter what. And that no matter what happens, you can always help others to return to life.